Welcome to Givers, Doers, and Thinkers. Today we talk to education consultant Erik Twist about how school leaders can transform America's K-12 education system. Let's go. Givers, Doers, and Thinkers introduces listeners to the fascinating people and important ideas at the heart of American civil society. We speak with philanthropists, nonprofit leaders, social entrepreneurs, historians, journalists, and anyone else who will help us understand contemporary civil society's achievements and failures. We also sprinkle in practical advice for nonprofit leaders and fundraisers. My name is Jeremy Beer, and thanks for joining us. All right. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Givers, Doers, and Thinkers. We're recording on March 29, 2022, and we are happy to have as our guest a quintessential doer, my good friend Erik Twist, who until very recently was doing as president of Great Hearts Arizona. From 2008 to 2021, Erik helped build Great Hearts Academies into the largest network of classical schools in the country. Erik is now the principal partner and president of an education consulting startup called Arcadia Education, which, in the interest of full disclosure, I should say here that American Philanthropic is an investor in and an enthusiastic investor at that. Erik has a deep knowledge of the charter school and ed reform landscapes in America. He holds degrees from Trinity University, where he studied political science, and Oxford University, where he studied theology and philosophy. He's been married for 20 years to the lovely Allison, who, from what I can tell, raises their 6 children almost single-handedly. Is that about right, Erik?
Nah, I'll take the 5th.
She'll be happy.
Thanks for that, Jeremy.
You're welcome. Welcome to the podcast, Erik Twist. We'll see where this conversation goes. In some ways, it'll be harder than many of the ones that I have because we know each other so well and we talk so often. So I'm going to try to make sure we aren't just jumping ahead in the conversation because of sort of the mutual knowledge we have. But we're going to talk about schools and civil society, the current landscape in the K-12 sector, especially among those who are trying to innovate in that sector, do different things than the things that haven't been working out, it seems, for several generations. So let's start, though, with the basics and your background, and we'll kind of get into the broader questions. But what is Great Hearts? I think most people in Arizona know what Great Hearts is, I think, increasingly in Texas, but everywhere else, it may not be very well known. What is Great Hearts? Why was it started? And why has it succeeded so wildly?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on, Jeremy. This is fun to talk to you like this. So Great Hearts is a network of public charter schools, pretty simply, a very large and growing network of charter schools. It has schools in, like you said, in Arizona and in Texas. It's got about 15,000 students today in Arizona, about 7,000 in Texas. It has another 1,000, I think, in an online offering that has students both in Arizona and Texas. It's about to open its first school in Baton Rouge. It's looking to extend its reach into Florida and even beyond that. But at the heart of the program is really a classical approach to K-12 education. In fact, I think today Great Hearts is the largest provider of classical education in the country. And it does that in the public sphere. You know, a lot of people think of classical schools as mainly parochial. Great Hearts has really carved out a niche in providing that type of education, really a remarkable education to kids tuition free. And it plans on continuing to do that in really all the states that have charter environments that make that possible.
What do you mean when you say it's a classical education? To someone who doesn't know what that term means, or maybe thinks they know what it means and maybe finds it a little bit scary. What does that mean?
Yeah, I think at the heart, you know, it for those that aren't familiar with it, you can kind of harken back to a sort of more traditional style of education. And so when we think about classical education, we think about, you know, of course, studying the classics, giving students a really rich engagement with their cultural heritage, right? As Americans, as Westerners, So that starts even in kindergarten when we think about the stories that we're putting in front of them, what a classical school would put in front of them. You think about Aesop's fables, and you think about giving them Robert Louis Stevenson poetry and things like that. Rich stuff, good stuff, and of course that takes on more shape and more depth as they get older. And so, really, a classical education is meant to give them the type of education that for so long was sort of hidden behind the gates of private and elite institutions. The elite of all cultures were sort of given, at least in the West, this style of education, deep engagement in literature, in history, in mathematics, and science, in other languages, in the arts, right? Learning how to read music, learning how to understand technique in the fine arts. We think about memorization. We think about really having a rich cultural history and understanding the different mediums of communication that human culture has devised, for thousands of years. Classical education is really attempting to give students as much of that as possible within the K-12 space. So
classical education has a distinctive content today in that it is rooted in the classics, rooted in a sense of Western history, a sense of Western tradition and Western culture, and in its good and its not so good aspects, right? But there's a style to classical education pedagogy too, right?
Oh, for sure.
Great Hearts does it. What is that? How would you characterize the style of teaching that happens in a Great Heart school or a classical school generally that is different than in a mainstream public district school?
Yeah, I would say probably two main distinctions. The first one, as it would be articulated within the classical school movement, would be the Socratic method. And some people have come across that. But that would be probably the most distinctive pedagogical style that you find in the classical school movement. And this is, comes under different names, but it's sort of different than your typical didactic approach, or you think about a teacher standing at the front and sort of giving you a list of things to memorize. This is much more engaging and much more of a style of the teacher posing either a problem or putting in front of the student a kind of phenomena. Something happening, and that's true whether it be a sentence in grammar. It'd be a frog in the biology class, or when we think about even literature, philosophy, a moral problem that might be put in front of the students, and then facilitating a conversation about what do we find to be true here, right? What comes at us? Can we name it, right? Can we understand it? Can we articulate it to one another? And that method is, again, has a rich history. It's something that too often is relegated to maybe the university setting. It was for a long time forgotten to be something that was truly engaging, even for kindergartners, right, who are reading an Aesop's fable and have a beginning sense of something matters here. There's something important going on in this story, and something that I need to wrestle with and think about with my classmates, with my teacher. The teacher really in a Socratic seminar style approach is asking almost as many questions, especially as the kids get older, as they are giving wisdom and giving answers themselves. I think also sort of attached to that, and this is more unique only because of how much education has shifted since, say, Dewey, maybe Rousseau and Dewey, is that it is actually more traditional and in a sense more, especially in the lower grades when we think about primary and elementary education, so K5, K6. It does take seriously that the teacher is the shepherd in the classroom. The teacher is the one driving the culture, and the teacher does know things the students don't know, and that the students desperately need.
Well, that's the sense. There is a body of knowledge to be known and mastered is part of one of the premises of classical education. Yeah,
there are things out there that ought to be passed on.
Right? It's not just critical thinking skills that we're seeking to inculcate.
Yes. So there is a tradition And in fact, it is an act of love to pass on that tradition, right? Doesn't mean that the tradition is flawless, right? I think you had said that earlier. I mean, the best schools are very honest about the cultural and traditions that we inherit and look at them with a truthful eye, right? Through a truthful lens. And those are obviously some of the richest discussions that human beings have with one another about even how we understand history or certainly in the sciences, the ability to question and to debate. That if you're in a classical school, you should see that in spades. Right? What you see so often especially in K-12 institutions now throughout the country, throughout the world, really, is a really bland, a kind of banal approach to education, which is really the most they sort of come up with the most efficient systems for preparing for the next assessment, right? And you just move on to the next one, and it's really about. I mean, most of us went through this. In fact, it's memorization and regurgitation, but there is no really exploration, no conversation. No kind of rich debate going on about whether or not the thing that we have in front of us we understand, and do we believe it to be true, to be good, to be beautiful? Those questions are, well, they're perennial, and they're the most exciting ones, and they're the ones that classical schools have protected.
And classical schools are, it seems that this works. Classical education is, I think it's fair to say, it's booming. I mean, we did a little bit of work on this with Great Hearts. I can't remember the statistics right now, but the number of seats, as they say in this business, that are classical education seats has grown tremendously over the last 15 or 20 years. What is it that's so attractive, and can it continue to grow? Because you and I were with somebody the other night who said, "Oh, the term classical is scary to people. It kind of puts parents off." How can both those things be true at one and the same time, where it seems to me like it's growing like a weed and yet it's scary?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting question. I like that question, Jeremy. So I think, first of all, it is absolutely growing. It's not scaring that many people off, right? Because it's growing like wildfire in many ways. And I think it's growing in large part for a kind of third pillar that we haven't really talked about, that is typical of a classical school model, which is moral formation. Yeah. It is this idea that, well, really it comes down to a particular worldview that assumes right out of the gate that there is truth, that there are universal moral truths, and that those universal truths levy some expectation upon each person in each generation, each culture, each nation throughout time. And that has been lost in a lot of education writ large, right? And there are a lot of us in I would say the Gen X generation who, we have our kids now going through the K-12 system, who look back on the type of education that we were given that was very assessment driven, and it was sort of stripped of its morality, right? Or at least it was trying to strip itself of morality. And we found it very shallow. And I think that there are a lot of parents who are desperate, especially with the wider debates going on in culture, desperate to find schools that adhere to the values of the home, that are at least not going to undermine those values, right? That are not antagonistic against the values of the family. And classical education is really one of the safe harbors within the education choice movement, where you can be pretty darn sure that by putting your kids in those schools, that they're going to, we used to say this at Great Hearts, that we want those kids to be picked up at the end of the day better than they were dropped off, because that's what we want as moms and dads. And so I think the attraction to classical education is probably first there in some sense. There's a general understanding that this is a good place, right? That the type of schools that are adhering to a classical model are doing so because they have a robust anthropology, a rich and deep sense of what it means to be good and true and beautiful. Now,
in a way, but I think the point is very important, and in a way that comports with the sorts of values and principles that the majority of Americans seem to want to claim for themselves as well. In other words, they're a sort of a woke educational style that might be happening in the K through 12 system now is also doing moral formation. It's just doing it in such a way that's ideological and antagonistic to the values of many of the families sending their children there. Would you agree with that statement?
Undoubtedly.
It doesn't seem, in other words, that relativism is even our problem anymore. I think you're not using that language, I think, quite on purpose, but some people still do. And we're sort of past the age of relativism. We're in an age of ideological monism, a sort of a right assurance. But that in and of itself it does offer kind of moral formation, but it's a classical school sort of advocate would probably call that moral deformation.
Right? For sure. And I think it's, you might say providential that the classical school movement is where it's at this moment in America's history, because, and what I mean by that is that it's growing and that it's actually quite strong, right? Its fibers are very strong and it's deeply attractive because I think we've shaken off, in a sense, as a culture, this understanding that there's a neutral moral space. Mm-hmm. And certainly the larger public school system is deep in the trenches of indoctrination. Now, the great irony here, Jeremy, is I would say that the classical schools are not actually themselves trying to indoctrinate, right?
Right. No, that's what I meant when I used the word ideological. Like that implies indoctrination in a way that what you're advocating does not.
Yeah, the best classical schools are apolitical, right? Mm-hmm. That they're not trying to make political statements. In fact, another thing that we would say at Great Hearts all the time as a kind of goal, right, is that our classrooms would be sanctuaries away from the current political noise, the popular cultural and popular political noise, that they were places where you could step into the past and that people from both sides of the political spectrum could come together and wrestle with one another, united by a deep understanding that there is some truth. Now that is a very different stance, sort of epistemologically in a sense than and morally than the relativism that maybe we were brought up in, or the relativism that we know from the mid 20th century and on, at least within the school system. I mean, it's older than that as a tradition, but I think that classical schools, some of them certainly have deeper ideological positions or more sectarian positions, and those you'll find within the private school world, and those are great and good, and parents should have every right to send their kids there. But when we're talking about the public school classical movement, which is really still in its early stages, right. It really is attempting to reclaim, in a sense, a space for both sides, within a neighborhood, within a community, to be able to send their kids. But all of them have to agree that there is some right and wrong at the end of the day. There is some answer. There is some truth. And that this school is set up to help your children pursue that. And so, kids come out of classical schools with all different types of ideas about how to order society. But one thing that they should all come out agreeing on is some, at least a coherent, well-established understanding of right and wrong, and certainly a sense that you can't hold a position within a flourishing society that there are no answers to these big moral questions or questions about how you order society. There are answers. It's not all up for grabs.
That's right. Even if we can never completely grasp it or all agree. I mean, that's the other side of it. So it sounds like what you're saying, if we wanted to rebuild, if we put this in the civil society framework, and it seems like one of the things that's most destructive of civil society right now, this inability to disagree within a community, right? Every disagreement is sort of cast as final and catastrophic. Is it it seems like what you would probably want to maintain, you can tell me if I'm wrong, is if we want schools to help us rebuild civil society, it's not really so much about what is being taught in those schools as it is how students are being formed in those schools. Although I guess you probably wouldn't want to dichotomize those two things.
No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't want to dichotomize. I mean, there are bad ideas,
Indeed, there are.
So
I don't want to dichotomize. As soon as I said that, I disagree with what I said as well.
Well, but what I think you're getting at, and I think it's important to consider that it's not just about what you learn, right? So kind of form and substance, so the substance of what our students are taught, educators should care deeply about. I mean, they should have a cultural literacy, right? It is absolutely essential for school leaders to come back to this notion that they're passing on a tradition, and that tradition they're passing on with all of its bruises, right? All of its jewels and all of its bruises. But what I think is happening in the larger, especially in the classical school movement, but I think it's wider than that, is how you teach is as important as what you teach. And so that you can't split form and substance, right? This would be an age-old classical idea. Right. And so this goes back to the Socratic method, I think. So when we're talking about the inability of people to argue with one another, right? Everything's zero sum. Mm-hmm. One of the fruits of the Socratic method over time ought to be civil discourse, right? You learn how to engage in disagreement. And in a sense, you're learning that within a culture, within society, within societal relationships, you have to take the long view in those conversations. We're planting the seeds in K-12 for how do you hold on to an idea with other people and pick it apart and try to discern whether or not you see it one way or another. But you're also in that moment learning how to disagree in those conversations and then go eat together and then go on the field together and play as a team and to be in community with one another. Now that goes back to, you got to have the kids discussing rich things. I mean, you can't give them, just glucose, right? They've got to have some protein. They've got to have stuff they can sink their teeth into, things that matter, because kids were born for things that matter. Mm-hmm. Right. They were shaped for that. And they know when you're giving them trivial or trivialities. Right. But when those collide beautifully, when you've got rich consequential ideas matched with civil discourse, kids will fall in love with that type of education, and they will, hopefully the idea is that they will become better citizens through it.
Amen. Well, we will be right back with Erik Twist after the break. All right. Time for a break here with a practicality from my colleague, Jason Lloyd. How you doing, Jason?
Good.
Jason is a senior consultant here at American Philanthropic and works with many faith-based nonprofit organizations, obviously a very large part of the nonprofit sector in the United States. Jason, you are going to talk to us about 3 ways to effectively steward donor relationships if you're a faith-based organization. Do I have that right?
Yes.
Yep. All right. Well, shoot. Give us the first one.
Well, first off is organizations should show humility, honoring donor intent. It's very easy for organizations to get caught up and with whatever donors might want to do and just let the tail wag the dog, essentially. And so it's important that faith-based nonprofits show humility, and if a grant or a donor's interest just does not align, to state that and maybe help them try to find a similar organization that might use their funds better than they might use them. So That would be the first.
What's the second one?
Second is treat donors as real people. They're not piggy banks. They're not vending machines. And so just making sure that you're able to get to know them as people, who their kids are, who their grandkids are, what are their hobbies, what are their interests.
Very good. Yeah. Treating donors like real people is generally good advice for everyone, but especially one to get right if you're a faith-based organization. And what's the third tip, Jason?
The third is just to be a faithful servant. This doesn't mean that you follow that the donor is in the control seat, but making sure that you take their money and use it wisely and apply it to the mission and try to reap the benefits of that and show the work that you are doing to the donor.
Very good. Thanks, Jason. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right, we are back with Arcadia Education Principal Partner and President Erik Twist, talking about the K-12 sector in America today and its relationship to civil society. So we've really just talked about classical ed in the first half of our discussion, Erik. There's a lot of ferment going on, though, in the K-12 education sector today for a lot of reasons. The two principal ones from the last couple of years being COVID, which revealed some pretty fundamental differences in how school systems see their role and how committed they are to their role in educating kids, and also the sort of the woke revolution, which has also been challenging for many families to navigate. What are you seeing besides classical ed? What do you see in the K-12 sector right now that you find most promising?
So I think there's a lot, and I think 2 years ago we wouldn't have thought it would have accelerated to the extent that it was. So I think certainly, you bring up the larger cultural points, Jeremy, and I think that's right. There's a shift going on there. Parents are more awake, more aware of the problems in the system than they've ever been. And you see lots of associations, local associations popping up everywhere, where parents are trying to take back control of the education systems that in many ways they're assigned to, right, by their government. They're assigned to it by virtue of where they live. So those shifts are important, and it'll be interesting to see what these new school board members do with the institutions that they are now in charge of. I'm not bullish on that entirely. I don't know if that's where the major changes are going to be taking place. I think there are a couple other areas where we're seeing just some real innovation and kind of revolution happening. And now I will couch all this to say it's not happening in every state, right? In our federalist system, we've got some states that are innovating rapidly. We have others that are flirting with innovation. And by innovation, I mean opening up their states to school choice and different options than just the government run system. And then we have some that are re-entrenching, right? Trying to push out even the little bit of choice that maybe they allowed in the mid 90s, late 90s when some of that was beginning. But I think if you're looking at, let's just start. This is in no particular order, but I think there are more people than ever questioning the need for a 4-year degree after high school, which means that people are starting to question what high school is. Right. And what ought it to be at scale. Okay. And so I think one of the most interesting innovations taking place is around technical training, vocational training within the 9 through 12, sort of apprenticeship work. And you're starting to see some schools marry traditionalist education, which mean classical, but more of the older forms of giving a cultural inheritance and sort of the things that every American should know, right? Certain the histories and idioms and music and art and poetry and all that, marrying that with preparing to be a carpenter, preparing to be a machinist.
Yeah.
Being able to leave at 18, and go apprentice with either a small business or a big company. And this is happening both because not everybody is meant to be a scholar. Not everybody is meant for the university, but there are huge economic shifts going on where the value proposition of the debt that you take out for that 4-year degree doesn't match up with the jobs that are available to you after you've taken out the debt.
Right.
And we could talk forever about how universities are squandering their own sort of inheritance and what they were set up to do. But there's more and more families and more kids that frankly going, listen, I like working with my hands. And if I can get a solid education K through 12, where I'm not an nincompoop, right? I know how to be clean cut. I'm well spoken. I can construct sentences well together. But I want to go, be a carpenter, and I want to learn how to do that. The prospects for those kids, Jeremy, to not only live a happy life, right, and working with their hands, doing the things that they love, and we're frankly probably created to be great at, but the prospects for them to own their own businesses, to be leaders, right, within the community are massive. And I think there are less and less people that are questioning. In fact, I think less than ever before are questioning people that come out without a university degree. As long as you're adding value, that the market will reward that. So I think that's something that really excites me.
Yeah, it's a great.
I think, kind of going back to the pandemic and how that's changed, especially the middle and upper middle classes, who tend to have more mobility than ever when it comes to work. A lot of them have been thinking again about what they value the most, and they've come to realize that they want to be with their kids more, and they want to do the things that they see other people doing on Instagram or in travel brochures or things like that, and go, well, if the education system were such that it allowed us more mobility and flexibility, then we would take that. And so I think you're not going to see as much of a growth of online education as some of the pundits will tell you. But I think it's going to be more than what we thought 2 years ago. And I think that's because it's getting better. It's not great yet. It's getting better. I think Great Hearts is probably doing one of the best jobs when it comes to this next iteration of what online education can look like. But I think you're going to see more of that. Now, as a part of that movement, right, what the online education platform allows is for some really interesting new ideas in terms of how people are associating locally. So these pods or micro schools, as somebody call them, co-ops, sometimes they're known as. Right. This is sort of the marrying of private association and a kind of private school wraparound to many times a public online option. So it allows for the education piece, which is hard for parents to solve, to get that, but then wrap around it, 8 families, 10 families, that can do, maybe they want to do evangelical Christian co-op or pod. Right. Maybe they just want something that's more aligned to agriculture and getting their kids out, into the field and working with animals while also getting their math and their reading and their science and all of that. I think we're going to see a lot of that starting to take shape, and people going, you know what? I don't need to put my kids in the big box school or even the charter school that's down the street that's open, from 8 to 3, 8 to 4. I can dip in and out of my pod. And if I want, we can go and do that hike in Glacier for a week, and still keep up with our studies, and then come back and get the social enrichment stuff that we need through this pod or this co-op or this micro school. So I think we're going to see a lot more of those over the next 5 years. And it's really, probably one of the most exciting things happening in education innovation within the K-12 sector.
Those are good answers. Those are really good answers. Actually, I wasn't sure what you were going to say. And those are rich answers. It's interesting. It'll be interesting to see if people can really make that shift away from thinking about, I send my kid to school in the morning, he or she comes back at the end of the day. I do it again the next day. I do that, and really blend. Now, but they had to do it during COVID. So maybe new cultural habits will be picked up and really spread. I'll be very curious to see to the extent of that last model can really take
Well, here's what's not going away. Parents will need a place. Most parents will need a place for their kids to be.
Yes.
And most parents will want a place, right? But
that's right.
But there is an underlying truth that's not spoken about much, but that schools play a kind of daycare role.
Right.
And that's true even for 16, 17, 18-year-olds, frankly. So hell, maybe that's true for college as well to a certain extent, right? That there's some sort of care the community is giving to these children that are growing up and they need it. And the mom and dad have things that they need to do in order to provide for the family. So this is why I'm not, I don't think a huge online revolution of kids staying in their rooms learning. I don't see that hitting at scale, but certainly these other associations seem to be solving for those parts that are not going away just by virtue of who we are as people.
Yeah, no, very good. So let's say you're somebody comes to you in your capacity at Arcadia Ed, an education entrepreneur, someone who wants to start some kind of new school to serve their community better. Let's make it very generic right now. I won't give too many details about this kind of person, but just in general, are there like don't do this, like red flag things you would say to this person right now? Whatever you do, don't do this. And are there any, whatever you do this kinds of pieces of advice? Or is it also specific that you can't really answer that question?
Well, it certainly has a specific element that you could go deep with someone into, but I do think that there are a couple mistakes that, let's call them ed entrepreneurs make. And it tends to be the same mistake that is often made in the wider nonprofit sector, which is what you have within education. And it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. Okay. We have people that are driven by a mission. They have a vision of the good and they want to see that thing be realized, right? But the mistake is in thinking that is sufficient, right? The mistake is in thinking, I've got this idea about how a curriculum should be developed and what pedagogical method ought to be used. And I have a sense of the vision of the whole, a kind of tableau, right, of what my school should look and feel and smell like. You should care about those things. That's, in a sense, that's your product. You need to know what it is. It ought to be differentiated. You should be able and you should be willing to jump in front of a bus to protect it, in a sense, right? Necessary, but not sufficient. Too often, the ed entrepreneur thinks the idea is enough and doesn't obsess about the operations as much as they obsess about their mission. You must understand that at the end of the day, it is a people organization that has to move those ideas into some executable form, right? There's a lot of little nitty-gritty things, from governance and compliance to filing your tax information on time, to making sure that you've got a clear sense of systems and operations for how you're making decisions, making sure that you're communicating clearly, both internally and externally. All of those are operational and system things. And they're not the things that most innovators get into a business to be great at. Right. But it is always their downfall. I almost spent a decade on the state charter board here in Arizona. And I will tell you, every single time a school came before us with an academic or a financial problem, it was always downstream of an operational one. And those, the leaders would come up and they would always tell the same story about why their school matters, why they got into the business of education. They would most oftentimes tear up because they believe these things deeply. They love their mission, but they did not do the necessary work of thinking about the operations. And so I would tell any ed entrepreneur if that's not your gift, to make sure that you're solving for that by who you hire. Surround yourself with people, or Jeremy, I'll make a plug here for Arcadia Education. This is in large part why we've entered this space, because we see this problem and we see that even big institutions struggle with this at times. But I would say that would be the biggest problem, thinking that ideas are all you need.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I'm not surprised you made it because we've talked about it a lot, but it's a good place to make it. That is the one thing to think about for sure. I thought maybe you would say, don't hire graduates from ed schools as your teacher.
Well, okay.
So, number two.
I guess I just assume. No, you probably shouldn't. Listen, I found in the really lower grades, oftentimes there's some skills that you acquire in the ed schools that are really helpful. K1, 2, maybe 3. Mm-hmm. The older the students get, the more what you really want are content experts. Mm-hmm. Because the kids are going to be hungry for depth in those areas. It's not so much strategy, right? There's so much strategy and process and tricks. And those are really helpful when in early formation years. But gosh, depth of knowledge and hiring people who love their subjects, who love them deeply. I mean, that covers a multitude of mistakes in the classroom. Now, you also, by the way, you need to make sure, and I would say this to anybody running a classical school, you've got to make sure you hire people that love people more than they love ideas. They should love ideas. They should love their subject matter, but gosh, make sure that they also love people.
Could you get a competitive advantage if you could swing it right now by kind of blowing through the pay scale for your teachers? If you were an ed entrepreneur, an innovator, say I'm paying, people are going to start at 60 and you can make $100,000 here within 10 years. I mean, something like that, something crazy like that. Would that be a competitive advantage? Is that even possible to financially
model? I don't think it's possible. I mean, this is, if it was possible, Jeremy, there'd be a lot of people doing it. So if you're going to start a private school and you think you can get 40, 50, 60,000 a year for it, because you're going to need to provide all the other things that number is going to require. No, I think it provides some advantage. Absolutely. But there have been studies on this. And I think that, anything over 75, although with inflation, maybe that's now 95. I don't know, but the advantage doesn't go up as much as you think. Work-life balance is really important. One thing that it's easy for people to forget is that teachers, they don't get to reschedule the meeting, right? And say, well, I can't do it today. I got, they have to be in a place with oftentimes a lot of kids who each one of them is eternally valuable. And each one of them, mom and dad have deposited, their most precious resource into the hands of these teachers. And they've got to be kind of delivering an ROI on that deposit every single day. That's sort of the expectation. It's an interesting business, when you think about it in that sense. But what teachers do is difficult, it really is. And teachers need to have time to interact with their colleagues, to not just be isolated in their classrooms, to be isolated in their own echo chamber of even their grade or their subject matter. They need to be with a sort of college of faculty in a sense. They need to be building adult relationships, and the culture of the school, the principal, the headmaster needs to be curating those adult interactions so that it is a place that adults want to live in, right? It's not just a place that they go and expend themselves for their students, but they are themselves enriched by the relationships that they're building on campus. That goes a long way to keep people in what is frankly a very tough industry.
No doubt about it. Okay, tell me why, this will be my last substantive question to you. Tell me why not just I, Jeremy Beer, but I, listener to this podcast, should have hope for the K through 12 education sector in America. Is it always just going to be around the fringes? We can have some good schools around the fringes. There'll be some micro things happening that are good, but 90% of the kids are going to be getting a poor and or ideological education. Or is there real hope somewhere that I can latch on to?
There is hope in places. There are states where I think you can be hopeful. I think that there is reason to be hopeful and extremely afraid.
Yeah.
If you're raising your kids in Illinois, if you're raising your kids in California, if you're raising your kids in the Northeast, I don't know if there's much hope. What we're seeing in the Sun Belt, what we're seeing in the Southwest, is this sort of movement of giving back to parents their children's future, and that I think is going to pick up speed. I think you're going to see more of that going on, partly because states are now competing for families. They're not just competing for employees and for businesses, they're competing for families. And the more that you have stories like Arizona and Texas and Florida, where, you hear mom and dad saying, well, our biggest problem is we had too many choices, right? We didn't know exactly where to put our kids, where we had to really think about it, but we found a great spot for little Timmy or whatever. So many parents around the country would long to have that problem of choice. Right. And so I think that there are a lot of states, listen, I think of Missouri, Arkansas, I think Iowa has made some huge changes, West Virginia, Ohio. There's some really amazing stuff going on policy wise that I think gives us reason to think that then moms and dads, education innovators, institutions are going to find a rich environment there with which to scale what's already proven itself to work. And it's sort of where we started the conversation. There are going to be other places that cut that innovation off and those choices off completely. Particularly just because they're completely in the pockets of those politicians, are completely in the pockets of the teachers unions. And they have all fallen prey, Jeremy, to this idea that institutions are more sacred than people, right? Yeah. That the institution is the thing that has somehow become worth protecting rather than the children that they were, or the families they were meant to serve. And some states are doubling down on that bad idea, and other states aren't. So where the other states are innovating, I think we're going to see some just wonderful things happening, cultures thriving, and the next generation in those states being happier and more prepared than the states that are right next door to them.
That's very well put. So Arcadia Ed is being launched on May 5th, formally. Very quickly, and people can go arcadiaed.com, I believe, right, is a website. There's information there about what. Tell very quickly, what will Arcadia Ed be doing to help propel this good stuff in the K through 12 sector?
Yeah, well, I mean, one way we've been putting it is, I think I said it earlier, helping institutions love their operations as much as they love their mission. So we want to get upstream with leaders really in any area of the sort of back end support of a school to make sure that it's thriving, make sure it's, it's firing on all cylinders. So that is, team health, project management. We're doing even marketing right now for some schools, governance and compliance, all the paperwork and stuff, market analysis if you're growing. But a big part of what we're doing is the whole overall HR ecosystem, from talent acquisition, making sure that you're well positioned in the marketplace with your offering and your messaging to attract the best candidates to you. And then all the things that need to be happening within your institution once you've hired that person to make sure that you are bringing them into the most vibrant and rich and accountable environment that you can. That a lot of schools struggle with that. So Arcadia Ed is going to be offering a ton of support, already is, frankly, for institutions that need to get that up to snuff, as they say.
Fantastic. Great stuff. Thanks, Erik. Thanks for all you do. And thanks for being on here today.
Thanks for having me.
Erik Twist, principal partner and president of Arcadia Education, which you can follow at arcadiaed.com. And it's early days, but it will be a big thing here soon. Thanks to Erik. Thanks a lot. We'll talk to you soon.